Hi, I'm Kent. I've been slowly working towards a two-part mold system for Shapecast. A couple of videos ago, I went ahead and made this mold here. I did some small tweaks to Shapecast to go ahead and make a two-part mold. So this is the bottom half and this is the top. Goes together like that. And that creates this pot here. So this one's fully fired. It is unglazed, but fully vitrified. And overall, that process worked relatively well. However, upon firing, I found that there were some cracks in the bottom. There's a hairline fracture all through there, and there's a few on the outside. So in the last video, I went ahead and redesigned my molds. So this is version 1, and this is version 2. And to get rid of that hairline crack around the foot, I went ahead and put a radius on this corner here and on this inside corner here. The thought that this was likely a stress fracture, since it showed up just in this one spot. So by easing that over, hopefully it will not crack when it goes through the firing cycle. I also made a few more changes, such as increasing the hole here and changing up the slip well. And I reprinted the bottom ring so I could add some pins to it for mold alignment. However, I didn't get that far. I started pouring the plaster and the first mold filled okay, but the second one, well, that happened. So the plaster was setting really, really fast. My best guess is that my plaster was old and it had probably absorbed some moisture. So when I was mixing it, it just kicked way too fast. And while I mostly got it in the first mold, I did not get it into the second. So I wasn't able to test my design changes. Let's go ahead and fix that. So what we're gonna do first is reassemble the molds and see if we can get the plaster to pour properly. So I went ahead and washed off most of the plaster of everything and cleaned everything up. So I think we're in pretty good shape. This here is the mold for the top. This one here is the mold for the bottom. So let me go ahead and assemble these real quick. And then the inner mold and the ring goes on the outer mold. Make sure there's nothing on my mold here. Okay, there is the top mold all assembled. Just snugged all those down. So this will be the second time I'm reusing this one. It'll be the third time I'm reusing the bottom mold. The reuse doesn't seem to be a problem. The only real failure I've seen, well, there's been two. The one I'm noticing right now is that sometimes the bolt holds will sink down into the PLA a little too far. So I suspect a small little washer would probably fix that, or at least distribute the load a little bit better. And then occasionally some of the inserts will pop out, and I can just reheat set those and maybe put a little dab of super glue on them. All right, and just like that, two molds. So I went ahead and procured a new bag of pottery plaster. So for those that are curious, I use USG #1 pottery plaster. So this is specifically formulated for ceramics applications, and it works really well for slip casting. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this open and measure out the amount of dry plaster I need. I got the plaster all measured out, and I have the water too. While that's slaking, one of the other things I did is I tried to clean everything really well. I have heard, although I haven't tested, that having cured plaster in with your mix of plaster ingredients will actually cause it to set faster. Not sure if that's true or not, but it seems plausible, so I went ahead and cleaned everything as best I could. All right, that's done slaking, so let's mix it and try not to introduce air bubbles. That's the end of the mixing. It's still nice and fluid, so we're way better off than last time already. I'm gonna pour into the top now. This one's actually a little bit harder to pour into, so I'm gonna do it while it is the most fluid. Oh yeah, this is way better. There we go, here's the top. And the bottom. Oh yeah, that's really good. All right, so no problems with plaster setting too fast. And we'll come back in a little bit and see how we did. There's the outside. It's looking okay. As I talked about in my last video, and I mentioned briefly at the beginning of this one has little nubs in it that will make keys in the plaster. So I have to be careful removing this. And there we go. So these here will be for some keys that we'll create. All right, so that's still stuck a little bit, so we'll use the alcohol and ice to pull it out. So let me do the other half first, so we can do them both together. I feel like I should be on a pit crew undoing all these bolts here. There's that side. Still got a few holding on here. There we go. Getting a little bit of chip out around those, but I was kind of expecting that. All right, so let's go ahead and pour the slushy mixture in so that we can get the inner molds to release. Nope, that one left. Just released by itself. Perfect. And there's that one. Cool. Dump this back in a bucket and we'll freeze it again. And our outer mold's still looking good. And this is slowly getting contaminated and I keep losing a little bit, but this is actually the same mixture as I had in the original time I used this. Need to add a little bit more alcohol, I think, at this point, but it definitely can be reused many, many times. All right, the moment of truth, let's check out our molds. So I've got a few pinholes, but overall the plaster is looking pretty good. And then this one, I think it just chipped when it was releasing by itself. There's a small chip right there, but I don't really see any bubbles in this one, so that's good. All right, cool. So those worked way better than last time. I'll go ahead and let these dry out. I need to go ahead and design something for some pins here that will fit down in here. And the idea is that those will then let me do alignment between the two halves. And then the other thing I still need to do is design a funnel so I can pour the slip in and I have a larger area to retain the slip. I'm gonna go ahead and clean up this mess and do that design work, and we'll come back when the molds are dry and we're ready to try them out. It's a few days later and the plaster is all dry. Here are the molds. I went ahead and cleaned them up a little bit more and they're looking pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and slip cast some pots, but before I do, I want to talk about some of the features I put in relative to the previous design. So here we go, side by side. These are exactly the same size. The differences are I rounded the foot over on the new one a little bit more relative to the last one, and that's hopefully to remove that stress fracture. Then the top, this one had a little bit of a slip well, which I have since removed. And then finally, there's all these little holes here that are in my new molds, and there wasn't anything in the face of the old ones. So the original mold I just stacked on itself and basically felt around the outside to try and get it aligned. I think that can do pretty well, but there's potential for some shifts. So with this new mold, I have all these recesses in the plaster, and those are for alignment pins. So I went ahead and designed and 3D printed these. These are just small little pins. So these are probably more complicated than they need to be, but they're just the diameter of the hole and they taper on both ends. I was originally trying to do something more complicated where it was split and acted like a spring, but the PLA was just fracturing. So I think these will be good enough, and potentially just a piece of dowel would actually work okay. So the idea is that these will fit inside the holes. And I made them a little bit short intentionally so we don't wind up bottoming out. And then the top piece can then be aligned and put on to those pins. There we go, like that. So hopefully that will allow me to align things better. So I went ahead and put 8 in. That was a very arbitrary number. They're also very narrow. I think I may want them larger in diameter and maybe a little bit deeper, although I worry about compromising the integrity of the mold. But that's why we're doing this. We're just trying this out and seeing how it works. And then the other change is, in changing the slip well, I went ahead and modeled up a funnel. And this fits in basically perfectly into the hole. So just like that. There's just a little bit of tolerance so it slides in there, but I don't want slip coming back the other way because the level of the slip is going to be up here. And so I don't want it to make its way around the outside. It also extends a little bit beyond the bottom of the pot intentionally, and that's to account for the thickness of the clay. Again, that's an experiment. I don't know how exactly this is going to work, but I want to try it out. There's one more idea behind using the pins, and that is that both of these surfaces are flat or can be flat. I haven't done anything with these surfaces yet. These are basically straight as they came out of the 3D molds. I think if you look very closely, it's not exactly flat. And what I think I'm going to do is actually lap these faces, basically sand them down and make them very smooth. And by having the pins, there is no structure in the way for me to do that. However, that may be overkill, and so I want to go ahead and first cast it as is and see how it does, and we'll come back and modify it if needed. So I think I'm going to go ahead and put in all the pins. The other thing I know I want to change right away is that a few of these broke out. It's because I have a sharp corner here. I think I want to relieve the angle a little bit in future iterations. All right, there all of those are. Go ahead and set the top on the bottom. See if I can get these aligned. All right, that's looking pretty good. Get a rubber band just to hold it together. So now I don't have to worry about it shifting, but it could potentially separate. And I'm going to go ahead and pour this one over my DIY slip table here, just in case it decides to leak. The other thing I learned is my funnel is actually at 45 degrees, and I can't do that without supports. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and fill this up. And then go all the way up into the funnel. And indeed, I am leaking out the side, not surprisingly. Should stop in a second. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and let this sit for about half an hour. I'm gonna keep an eye on it, make sure it does actually stop leaking. I can tell the funnel is a win already. This is dropping in level, but not dropping nearly as fast as the last one, which is a much smaller slip well. We should have our pot formed on the walls, and indeed, the slip stopped coming out. So now I'm going to take this and dump it back into my container. All right, there we go. So now I have a decision. Do I leave the funnel in or not? I think for the first time I'll leave it in. So we'll just set it right there. All right, I'm going to let that continue to set for about another half an hour, and then we'll go ahead and demold it. So first I'm going to pull the funnel. Rubber band, and I don't know if you can see, the funnel left a little bit of a funky rim on the inside, so I'm going to go ahead and clean that up real quick. All right, now the real question is, can I demold it? There we go, I think it just came. Oh, no. It split. Well, that's unfortunate. So I'm not too sure exactly why that happened. I've got a couple of guesses. So one is the flash between the pieces, and that may be acting as a little bit of an adhesive. There's also all these pins, so there's a fair amount of friction to try and get it off. So one or two of those might be the problem. So let me go ahead and clean this up, and we will try something else. I've tried this a few more times and have had some mixed success. I had a couple more fail in exactly the same way where they split, and I was able to get another one out. So here's one that I cast a little while ago, and it's okay. The seam line is still very ugly, but otherwise it worked okay. The fact that this is being inconsistent is a little bit annoying. My last mold, I didn't have these problems. So I've kind of got two ideas about what's going on. One is the pins I'm using for the alignment, and the other one is the surfaces themselves that are mating together. So for the pins, I think it was a good idea, but I'm not sold. If I'm going to go down this path, I will need to change them up. One, there's clay that's getting stuck down inside, so that's a little bit annoying. I also think they probably need to be wider and shallower as opposed to narrow and deep. I think the problem I'm having in terms of it coming apart is I have too many pins, so the friction themselves, like in order to overcome that, is just basically tearing the clay. And then the other issue, which could be related, is the flash I'm getting between the two plaster pieces. So I'm getting plaster leaking out, and in doing so, I think it's acting as a bit of a glue. So I need to overcome that bond in order to release the pot, but in doing so, I think I'm tearing the pot. So the first issue with the pins, I think I will punt, and that will be something to deal with later. The second issue I think I can deal with right now, and it's actually part of the design process and something I was thinking about along the way. So the 3D printed surfaces are pretty good, but they don't mate perfectly together. And so I actually want to change these faces so they align better. I watch a fair bit of YouTube content around a variety of different things around making, and one of them is actually machinists and metalworking. Not something I probably will ever do, but one of the things they have to contend with is taking a piece of metal that's a little bit wonky and trying to get a nice flat surface out of it. So if I was in a machine shop and these were metal, I would fixture this to the plate and run the mill across the top, and I would get a nice flat surface, and I could do that. These would then be perfectly flat, and I could mate them together. Well, I don't have a mill, and I suspect most of you don't either. However, there is a simpler approach, and that has to do with the wardrobe change my bench here has had. So this here is actually a piece of old countertop that I've had kicking around my garage for a while. It's nice and thick, and importantly, it's flat. So what I'm going to do is take a piece of sandpaper and take the mating faces together and basically sand them back and forth. Because the surface is flat, that will then make this surface flat, and then hopefully they will register against each other better. That should at least deal with the flash, and hopefully with the seam line, it'll clean that up. I don't know if it's actually going to fix things, but we'll try it. I think I'm going to go ahead and get a couple pieces and tape them together and tape them down. All right, there we go. Nice flat piece of sandpaper. And now I'll just take this and go back and forth. This is still a little bit wet from the last casting, so it's not kicking up too much dust. And that's already starting to have an effect. So here there's some of the layer lines from the original print, but here it's already getting flat. Do that one. One of the other reasons to do this lapping approach is that I think the 3D printed piece, the inner mold, actually sunk down a little bit. There's actually a little bit of a lip on this piece here. And I think that's the foam gasket and the outer ring causing a slight bit of separation. I think that is more or less inevitable with my approach and maybe with any approach. So I think this kind of subtractive step may be required no matter what. At this point I have a nice fresh face. This feels pretty smooth. This one still has a few layer lines. Let's do it some more. And I keep spinning this around, so even if it's not completely smooth, it should wear evenly. Sponge this off, get any plaster dust, or plaster paste more accurately since it's damp. And let's see how these mate together now. Oh yeah, those fit way better, and I should be able to rotate them and they should fit equally as well. So these are a bit damp, so I'm going to go ahead and clean the rest of the plaster off, and we'll let them dry out, and we will try again. In the meantime, I'll reclaim my bench. The molds have dried out again, so let's go ahead and see if our newly flattened faces solve some of our problems. I'm going to put in fewer pins at the moment. I'm worried less about the alignment, and I really just want to get the slip cast piece out. So we'll put a few of my pins in. And we'll see if we can get this aligned. All right, good. And again, the rubber band just to hold it. And our funnel. That looks good, and there's not much daylight between those, so I think we've got a pretty good seal. And slip. So first off, I don't see any slip leaking out the sides, so that is a step in the right direction. All right, same drill. Let this sit, drain it, and come back and see if we can demold it. So first the funnel. I think I want to make the funnel slightly smaller. It's a little bit tight. Ah, that came out. And then the rubber band. And I think I want to try and demold this upside down. I'd rather the foot come off first. Just apply a little bit of pressure. Oh, just felt it move. Yay! Awesome. So that looks way better. Got a little bit of leaking on this side right here, so maybe some more sanding to be done. Maybe I'm hallucinating, but it feels like maybe it's slightly recessed. Hard to tell, but this looks really good. The reason I wanted the bottom to come out first is that the clay will shrink and it will then constrict around the foot here, and that could cause some cracking. In contrast, the top, there's nothing to shrink around, so it can actually sit there for a while. So this one came out. I think I'll go ahead and let it sit this way for a while so it can actually go ahead and shrink and firm up a little bit more. It's still pretty soft, and so I don't want to handle it. All right, this has stiffened up a little bit more. That came out nice and easy. So here's our flash, and yeah, it's very thin. Get it close up for you. But definitely still a seam line. However, I think that is less to do with the mold faces and probably more about this edge right here. I do think I want to sand this down some more. The sandpaper I used was relatively fine. I think a coarser sandpaper would be good so I can be a little bit more aggressive and get down a little bit farther. However, I don't have any of that, so that will be something for the future. And I think I want to experiment with these pins a little bit more. With it so wet, I can't really tell what the alignment's like. I do, like right here, I think there's a layer shift. And I'm not too sure that is any better than when I was doing it manually, just stacking the two molds on top of each other. So I think probably I will experiment with putting in all the pins and seeing if that helps the alignment. So we might need to think about a different approach, or just doing it the old-fashioned way and just lining it up by hand. My previous mold, that worked pretty well. I'm going to need to let this dry out, and then I have a bisque firing coming up soon. So hopefully I can bisque fire it and see if that stress fracture comes back, or if browning it off has fixed it. That will also give me a chance to think a little bit more about this alignment issue and if there are other strategies I might want to employ. I have thought about a couple of different options, but all of them have some trade-offs. So I'm trying to find the simplest thing that will just work. And then once that's working, I want to go ahead and make a bunch of these spheres. They're really fun and have some fun ideas for what to do with them. And then, of course, explore some other shapes. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks.